EGIL'S SAGA Skallagrim Egil Saga. Chapter 22. Death of Thorolf Kveldulfson. King Harald was at Lada when the brothers went away. Immediately after this the king made him ready with all haste, and embarked his force on 4 ships, and they rowed up the firth, and so by the Baetis Sea inwards to the Isthmus of Elda. There he left his ships behind, and crossed the isthmus northwards to Nomdal. The king there took ships belonging to the landowners, and embarked his force on them, having with him his guard 400 men. 6 ships he had well equipped both with weapons and men. They encountered a fresh headwind and rowed night and day, making what progress they could. The night was then light enough for travel. On the evening of a day after sunset they came to Stubbornness, and saw lying there opposite the farm a long ship with tents spread, which they knew to be Thorolf's. He was even then purposing to sail away, and had bidden them brew the ale for their parting carousal. The king ordered his men to disembark, and his standard to be raised. It was but a short way to the farm buildings. Thorolf's watchmen sat drinking, and were not at the posts. Many were already half drunk. The king had made a ring of men set around the hall, and they then shouted a war whoop, and a war blast was blown on the king's horn. On hearing this, Thorolf's men sprang to their weapons. The king caused some to make proclamation at the door, bidding women, children, old men, thralls, and bondmen to come out. Then came out Sigríðr, the mistress, and with her the women that were within, and the others to whom permission was given. Sigríðr asked if the sons of Kari of Burdla were there. They both came forward and asked what she would of them. "Lead me to the king," she said. They did so, but when she came to the king she said, "Will anything, my lord, let you reconsider your feelings of Thorolf?" The king answered, "If Thorolf will yield him to my mercy, then shall he have life and limb, but his men shall undergo punishment according to the charges against them." Upon this, Olvir Nuf went to the room, and had Thorolf called to speak with him, and told him what terms the king offered them. Thorolf answered that he would not take of the king compulsory terms of reconciliation. "If the king allows us to go out, we'll let things go their own course." The king said, "Set fire to the room. I will not waste my men by doing battle with him outside. I know that Thorolf will bring a wrathful slaughter if he is allowed to fight." So fire was set to the room, and it soon caught, because the wood was dry and the walls tarred and the roof thatched with birch bark. Thorolf bade his men break up the wainscoting and get gabled beams, and so burst through the planking. And when they got the beams, then as many men as could hold on took to one beam, and they rammed out the corner with the other beam, so hard that the clasps flew out, and the walls started asunder, and there was a wide opening. First went out Thorolf, then Thorgils, then the rest one after the other. Fierce then was the fight, nor for a while could it be seen which had the better of it, for the room guarded the rear of Thorolf's force. The king lost many men before the room began to burn. Then the fire attacked Thorolf's side, and many of them fell. Now Thorolf bounded forwards, hewed on either hand, small need to bind the wounds of those who encountered him. He made for where the king's standard was, and at that same moment fell Thorgils. But when Thorolf reached the shield wall, he pierced with the stroke the standard-bearer, crying, "Now I am but 3 feet short of my aim." Then Thorolf was stabbed with spears by the king's guard, falling to his knees, and it was the king himself that dealt him his death wound. Thorolf fell forward at the king's feet, dead. The king called out then, and bade them cease further slaughter, and this they all did. After this, the king bade his men go down to the ships, and Olfir Nuf and his brother, he said, "Take you Thorolf your kinsman, and give him honorable burial. Bury also all the other men who have fallen, and see to the binding of the wounds of those who have hope of life. But let none plunder here, for this is all now my property." This said, the king went down to his ships, and most of his force was with him. And when they came on board, men began to bind their wounds. The king went round the ship and looked at men's wounds, and when he saw a man binding a surface wound, he said, "Thorolf gave not that wound. His weapon bites far worse. Few, I think, bind the wounds which he gave, and great loss have we in such men." As soon as day dawned, the king had his sail hoisted and sailed south as fast as he could. As the day wore on, they came upon many rowing vessels in all the sounds between the islands. The forces on board them had meant to join Thorolf, for spies of his had been southwards as far as Naumdal, and far and wide about the islands. These had got to know how Hallvard and his brother were come from the south, with a large force meaning to attack Thorolf. Hallvard's company had constantly met a headwind, and had waited about in various havens till news of them had gone the upper way overland, and Thorolf's spies had become aware of it, and this gathering of force was on this account. The king sailed before a strong wind till he came to Naumdal. There he left the ships behind and went by land to Trondheim, where he took his own ships that he had left there, and then out to Lada. These tidings were soon heard, and reached Hallvard and his men where they lay. They then returned to the king, and their voyage was much mocked at. The brothers Olfir Nuf and Eyvind Lamb remained a while at Stubbornness and saw to the burial of the slain. To Thorolf's body they gave all the customary honors paid at the burial of a man of wealth and renown, and set over him a memorial stone. They saw also to the healing of the wounded. They arranged also the house with Sigurida. All the stock remained, but most of the house furniture and table service and clothing was burnt. And when this was done, they went south and came to King Harald at Trondheim, and were with him for a while. They were sad and spoke little with others, and it was so that one day the brothers went before the king, and Olfir said, "This permission we brothers claim of thee, O king, that when we go home to our farms, for such things have happened here that we have no heart to share, drink, and seat with those who drew weapon on our kinsman Thorolf." The king looked at them and answered curtly, "I will not grant you this. You shall be here with me." They went back to their places. Next day, as the king sat in the audience hall, he had the brothers called to him, and said, "I have given thought to your requests to go home. You have both done well by me here at court, and always done your duty. I have thought well of you in everything. Now, even, I will allow you to go north to Hålogaland. I will give you in marriage to Sigurida of Stubbornness, Thorolf's widow, and I will bestow on you all the wealth that belonged to Thorolf, and you shall have also my friendship, if you can keep it. But Olfir shall remain here with me, for his skill as a skald I cannot spare him." The brothers thanked the king for the honor granted to them and said that they would willingly accept it. Then Eyvind made ready for the journey, getting a good and suitable ship. The king gave him tokens for this matter. His voyage sped well, and he came north to Alost and Sandnes. Sigurida welcomed him, and Eyvind then showed her the king's tokens and declared his errand, and asked her in marriage, saying that it was the king's message that he should obtain this match. But Sigurida saw that her only choice, as things had gone, was to let the king rule it. So the arrangement was made, and Eyvind married Sigurida, receiving with her the farm at Sandnes and all the property that had been Thorolf's. Thus Eyvind was now a wealthy man. The children of Eyvind and Sigurida were Fidsquinter, father of Eyvind's skald Spoiler, and Gerlog, whom Sigvat Red had to wife. Fidsquinter married Gunhilda, daughter of Earl Halfdan. Her mother was Ingeborg, daughter of King Harald Fairhair. Eyvind Lam kept the king's friendship so long as they both lived. Chapter 23. The Slaying of Hilderida's Sons. There was a man named Kettle, son of Thorkel, Earl of Naumdal, and of Rafnilda, daughter of Kettle of Rafnista. He was a man of wealth and renown. He had been a fast friend of Thorolf Kveldulfson, and was his near kinsman. He had been out on that expedition when forces gathered in Hålogaland with intent to join Thorolf, as has been written about above. But when King Harald went south, and men knew of Thorolf's slaying, they then called a gathering. Hang took with him 60 men, and turned to Torgar. Hilderida's sons were there, and few men with them. He went up to the farm, and made an attack on them, and there he killed Hilderida's sons, and most of those who were there. And Hang and his company took all the wealth they could lay their hands on. After that Hang took ships of burden, the largest he could get, and put on board all the wealth belonging to him that he could carry. His wife and children also he took, and all the men that had been with him in the late work. And when they were ready, and the wind blew fair, they sailed out to sea. A man named Baug, Hang's foster brother of good family and wealth, steered the second ship. A few winters before Ingolf and Huriolf had gone to settle in Iceland, their voyage was much talked about. It was said there was good choice of land there. So Hang sailed west over the sea to seek Iceland. And when they saw land, they were approaching it from the south. But because the wind was boisterous and the surf ran high on the shore, there was no haven. They sailed on westwards along the sandy coast. And when the wind began to abate and the surf to calm down, there before them was a wide river mouth. Up this river they steered their ships, and lay close to the eastern shore. That river is now called Thjors River. Its stream was then much narrower and deeper than it is now. They unloaded their ships, then searched the land eastward of the river, bringing the cattle after them. Hang remained for the first winter on the eastern bank of the outer Rang River. But in the spring he searched the land eastwards, and then took land between Thjors River and Markfleet, from fell to firth, and made his home at Hofi by East Rang River. Ingunn, his wife, bore a son in the spring after their first winter, and the boy was named Rafen. And though the house there was pulled down, the place continued to be called Rafentoft. Hein gave Baug land in Fleet Lythe down the Mark River to the river outside Breda Bolstead, and he dwelt at Lythe End. To his shipmates Hein gave land or sold it for a small price, and these first settlers are called land takers. Hein had sons Storolf, Huriolf, Helgi, Vesta. They all had land. Rafen was Hang's fifth child. He was the first lawman in Iceland. He dwelt at Hofi after his father, and was the most renowned of Hang's sons. Chapter 24. Kveldulf's Grief. Kveldulf heard of his son Thorolf's death, and so deeply grieved was he at the tidings that he took to his bed. Skallagrim came often to talk to him, and told him that there was things they could do to cheer his spirits. Anything, he said, was more fitting than to become worthless and bedridden. Better counsel is it that we seek to avenge Thorolf. Maybe we shall come across some of those who took part in his slayings. But if not that, yet there will be men whom we can reach, and thereby hurt the king. Kveldulf sang a song to Skallagrim. Thorolf in northern Isle, O cruel Norns is dead. Too soon the thunder god hath taken my warrior's head. Thor's heavy hammer rage hold my weaklings from the fray. Though keen my spirit always be, no cold vengeance will be mine. King Harald went that summer to Upland, and in the autumn westwards to Varus, and as far as Vors. Ulfir Nuf was with the king, and often spoke with him about whether he would pay atonement for Thorolf, granting to Kveldulf and Skallagrim money, compensation, or such honor as would content them. The king did not altogether refuse this, if father and son would come to him. Whereupon Ulfir started northwards for the firths, nor stayed his journey till he came one evening to these two. They received him gratefully, and he remained there for some time. Kveldulf questioned Ulfir closely about the doings at Sandnes when Thorolf fell, and what deeds Thorolf had wrought before he fell, who smote him, with what weapon, where he received most wounds, what was the manner of his fall. Ulfir told him all that he was asked, and that King Harald gave him the wound that was alone enough for his bane, and that Thorolf fell forward at the very feet of the king. Then answered Kveldulf, Good it is that you tell us this, for it is an old saw that he will be avenged who falls forward, and that vengeance will reach him who stands before him when he falls. Yet it is unlikely that such good fortune will be ours. Orville told father and son that he hoped, if they would go to the king and crave atonement, that it would be a journey to their honor, and he bade them venture this, adding many words to that end. Kveldulf said he was too old to travel. I shall sit at home, he said. Will you go, Grim? Said Ulfir. I think I have no errand other, said Grim. I shall see to the king, not fluent in speech, nor do I think I shall long pray for atonement. Ulfir said that he would not need to talk much. We will do all the speaking for you, as well we can. And seeing that Ulfir pressed this matter strongly, Grim promised to go when he thought he could be ready. He and Ulfir set them a time when they thought Grim should come to the king. Then Ulfir went away first, and returned to the king. Chapter 25. Skallagrim's journey to the king. Skallagrim made him ready for this journey, choosing out of his household and neighbors the strongest and best that he were to be found. One was Arni, a wealthy landowner, another Grani, a third Grimorf, and his brother Grim, housecarls these of Skallagrim, and the two brothers Thorbjorn Krum and Thord Begoldi. These were called Thororna's sons. She dwelt hard by Skallagrim and was of magic skill. Begoldi was a coal biter. there was a man named Thorir Giant and his brother Thorgir Earthlong, Odd Lone Dweller, and Gris Freedman. 12 there were for the journey, all stalwart men, and several of them shape-strong. They took a rowing ship of Skallagrim's, went southwards along the coast, stood into Ostra Firth, and then travelled by land up to Vos, to the large lake there, and there, course lying so that they must cross it, they got a suitable rowing ship and ferried them over. Once they had not very far to go to the farm where the king was being entertained. They came there at the time when the king was gone to table. Some men they found to speak with outside in the yard and asked what was going on. This being told them, Grim begged one to call Ulfir Nuf to speak with him. The men went into the room and went up to where Ulfir sat and said, "There be men here outside newly come, 12 together. If men one may call them, for they are more like giants in stature and semblance than to mere mortal men." Ulfir at once rose and went out, for he knew who they were who had come. He greeted well his kinsman Skallagrim, and bade him go with him into the room. Grim said to his comrades, "'Tis the custom here that men go weaponless before the king. 6 of us shall go in, and the other 6 shall bide without and keep our weapons." Then they entered, and Ulfir went up to the king, Skallagrim standing at his back. Ulfir was spokesman. "Here now is come Grim Kveldulfson. We shall feel thankful to thee, O king, if thou make his journey hither a good one, as we hope it will be. Many get great honor from thee to whom less is due, and who are not nearly so accomplished as is he in every kind of skill. Thou wilt also do this because it is a matter of moment to me, if that is of any worth in your opinion." Ulfir spoke fully and fluently, for he was a man ready of words, and many other friends of Ulfir went before the king and pleaded this cause. The king looked round and saw that a man stood at Ulfir's back, taller than all the others by a head, and bald. "Is that Skallagrim?" asked the king. "That tall man?" Grim said he guessed right. "I will then," said the king. "If thou crave atonement for Thorolf, then you should become my liegeman and enter my guard here and serve me. Maybe I shall so like your service that I shall grant you atonement for your brother, or other honor not less than I granted him. But you must know how to keep it better than he did, if I make you as great a man as he was." Skallagrim answered, "It is well known how far superior to me was Thorolf in every regard, and he got no lucky by serving you, O king. Now will I not take that counsel. Serve you I will not, for I know I should get no luck by yielding my services as I should wish, and as would be worthy. Methinks I should fail here more so than Thorolf." The king was silent, and his face became blood red. Ulfir at once turned away and told Grim and his men to go out. They did so. They crossed the yard of the farm and took their weapons, and Ulfir bade them be gone with all haste. He and many with him escorted them to the waterside. Before parting with Skallagrim, Ulfir said, "Kinsman, thy journey to the king ended otherwise than I would have chosen. I urged much thy coming here. Now I entreat you go home with all speed, and come not in the way of King Harald unless there be better agreement between you than now seems likely, and keep thee well from the king and from his men. Go now." Then Grim and his men made their way over the water of the lake at Voss. But Olvir with his men going to the ships drawn up by the waterside hacked them about so that none was fit to launch, for they saw men coming down from the king's house, a large body well armed and advancing furiously. These men King Harald had sent after them to slay Grim. The king had found words soon after Grim went out and said, "This I see in that tall, bald head, that he is brimful of wolfishness, and he will, if he can bereach them, work scathe on men whom we should be both loath to lose. He may be sure, ye against whom he may bear a grudge, that he will spare none if he get a chance. Wherever he go after him, find him and slay him." Upon this they went and came to the water, and saw no ship there fit to launch, since Olvir's men had destroyed them all. So they went back and told the king of their journey, and that Grim and his comrades would now have gotten clear over the lake. Skallagrim went his way with his comrades till he reached home. He then told Kveldulf of his journey. Kveldulf showed him well pleased that Skallagrim had not gone to the king on this errand to take service under him. He still said, as before, that from the king they would get only loss and nothing good. Kveldulf and Skallagrim spoke often of their plans, and on this they were both agreed that they would not be able to remain in the land any more than other men who were at enmity with the king, but their counsel must be to go abroad, and it seemed to them desirable to seek Iceland, for good reports were given about choice of land there. Already friends and acquaintances of theirs had gone there, to wit Ingolf Arnason and his companions, and had taken to them land and homestead in Iceland. Men might take land there free of cost and choose their homestead at will. So they quite settled to break up the household and go abroad. Thorolf had in his childhood been fostered with Kveldulf, and he and Skallagrim were both about the same age, and as foster brothers were dear friends. Thorir had become a baron of the king's at the time when the events just told happened, but the friendship between him and Skallagrim continued. Early in the spring, Kveldulf and his company made ready with their ships. They had plenty of good craft to choose from. They made ready 2 large ships of burden, and took in each 30 able-bodied men, besides women and children. All the movable goods that they could carry they took with them, but their lands none dared buy for fear of the king's power. And when they were ready they sailed away, first to the islands called Solendir, which are many and large, and so scored with bays that few men know all their havens. Chapter 26 of Guttorm. There was a man named Guttorm, son of Sigurd Hart. He was uncle to the King Harald, and his foster father, and ruler over his forces, for the king was only a child when he first came to the throne. Guttorm had commanded the army in all battles which Harald had fought to bring the land under his control. But when Harald became sole king of all Norway and sat in peace, then he gave to his kinsman Guttorm Vestfold and East-Agdir and Ringerike and all the land that had belonged to Halfdan the Black, his father. Guttorm had 2 sons and 2 daughters. His sons were named Sigurd and Ragnar, his daughter Ragnhildur and Aslaug. Guttorm fell sick, and when near his end sent for King Harald, bidding him see to his children and his province. Soon after this he died. On hearing of his death, the king summoned Hallvard Travelhard and his brother Sigtrygg, and told them to go on a message for him eastwards to Vik, he being then at Trondheim. They made great preparations for the journey, choosing them men and the best ships they could get. It was the very ship they had taken from Thorgil's Yellow. But when they were ready, the king told them their errand. They were to go eastwards to Tunsberg, the market town where Guttorm had resided. "Ye shall," said the king, "bring to me Guttorm's sons, but his daughters shall be fostered there till I bestow them in marriage. I will find men to take charge of the province and foster the maidens." So the brothers started with a fair wind and came in the spring eastwards to Vik and to Tunsberg, and there declared the errand. They took the sons of Guttorm and much movable property and went their way back. The wind was then somewhat slack and the voyage slower, but nothing happened till they sailed northwards over the Son Sea, having now a good wind and bright weather, and being in good mood. Chapter 27. Slaying of Hallvard and Sigtrygg. All through the summer, Kveldulf and Skallagrim kept a lookout shorewards on the highway of vessels. Skallagrim was very sharp-sighted. He saw Hallvard's company sailing by, and he knew the ship, for he had seen it before when Thorgils went with it. Skallagrim watched their course, and when they lay into haven at eventide, then he went back to his own men and told Kveldulf what he had seen, and withal how he had recognized the ship, being that which was once one of Thorolf's, and was taken by Hallvard from Thorgils, and doubtless there were some men on board who would be worth catching. So they made ready with their boats, and 20 men in each. Kveldulf steered one, Skallagrim the other. Then they rowed and made for the ship. But when they came where it lay, they put it in to land. Hallvard's men had set up the tent over their ship and laid them down to sleep. But when Kveldulf's force came upon them, and then the watchman who sat at the gangway leapt up and called out to the ship, they bade the men rise, for an enemy was upon them. Hallvard's party leapt to their weapons, but when Kveldulf with his men came to the gangway, he went out by the stern gangway, while Skallagrim went forward to the other gangway. Kveldulf had in his hand a battle-axe, but when he got on board he bade his men go along the outer way by the gunwale and cut the tent from its forks, while he himself rushed aft to the stern castle. And it is said that he then went a fit of ship's strength, as he had also several of his comrades. They slew all that came in their way. Skallagrim did the same where he boarded the ship. Nor did father and son stay hands still, the ship was cleared. Covered in blood, Kveldulf came aft to the stern castle. He brandished high his battle-axe and smote Hallvard right through helm and head, so that the axe sank in even to the shaft of his spine. Then he snatched it back towards him so forcibly that he whirled Hallvard aloft and slung him overboard into the water. Skallagrim cleared the forecastle, slaying Sigtrygg. Many men plunged into the sea, but Skallagrim's men took one of the boats and rowed after, and killed them all while they were swimming. Pools of blood floated around the boat. There were many lost with Hallvard, 50 men in all. The ship and the wealth that was in it, Skallagrim's men took. 2 or 3 men whom they deemed of least note they seized and gave them their lives, asking of them who had been in the ship and what had been the purpose of the voyage. After learning all the truth about this, they looked over the slain who lay on shipboard. It was found that more than half had leapt overboard and so perished, then had fallen on the ship. The sons of Guttorm had leapt overboard and perished. Of these one was a 12-year-old, and the other 10, and both were lads of promise. Then Skallagrim set free the men whose lives he had spared, and bade them go to King Harald and tell him the whole tale of what had been done there, and who had been the doers of it. "Ye shall also," said he, "bear to the king this little poem. For a noble warrior slain, vengeance now on king is taken. Wolf and eagle tread his prey, princes born to sovereign sway. Hallvard's body cloven through, headlong in the billows flew. Wounds of white once swift to fare, swooping vulture's beak doth tear. After this, Skallagrim and his men took out to their ships and captured ship and cargo. And then they made an exchange, loading the ship they had taken, but emptying one of their own smaller vessels. And in this they put stones and bored holes and sank it. Then, as soon as ever the wind was fair, they sailed out to sea. It is said of shape-shifting men, or men with a fit of berserk fury on them, that while the fit lasted they were so strong that none could withstand them. But when it passed off, they were then weaker than ever before. Even so it was with Kveldulf. When the shape-shifting fit went from him, then he felt exhaustion from the onset he had made, and became so utterly weak that he lay in bed. And now a fair wind took them out to sea. Kveldulf commanded the ship which they had taken from Hallvard. With the fair wind the ships kept well together, and for a long time were in sight of each other. But when they were now far advanced over the main, Kveldulf's sickness grew worse. And when it came to this, that death was near, then he called to him his shipmates, and told them that he thought it likely that he would be soon off on his own journey. I have never, he said, been an ailing man, but if it be so that I die, then make me a coffin, and put me overboard. And it will go far otherwise than I think if I do not come to Iceland and take land there. Please bear my greeting to my son Grim when you meet, and tell him that if he gets to Iceland and I don't, then to choose a homestead as near as may be to where I have come ashore. Shortly after this, Kveldulf died. His shipmates did as he had bidden them to do. They laid him in a coffin and shot it overboard. There was a man named Grim, son of Thorolf Kveldulfson, Fairhair, of noble kin and wealthy. He was in Kveldulf's ship. He had been an old friend of both father and son, and a companion both of them and of Thorolf, for which reason he had incurred the king's anger. He now took command of the ship after Kveldulf was dead. But when they got to Iceland, approaching the land from the south, they sailed westwards along the coast, because they had heard that Ingolf had settled there. But coming over against Reykjanes and seeing the firth open before them, they steered both ships into the firth. And now the wind came on to blow hard, with much rain and mist. Thus the ships were parted. Grim the Hålogalander and his crew sailed in up the Borgar Firth, past all the skerries. Then there they cast anchor till the wind fell and the weather cleared. They waited for the flood tide and then took their ship up into the river mouth. It is called Gufur River. They drew the ship up this river as far as it could go, then unshipped the cargo and remained there for the first winter. They explored the land along the sea both in and out, and they had gone far before they found Kveldulf's coffin cast up in a creek. There they carried the coffin to the ness hard by, set it down there, and raised thereover a pile of stones. Chapter 28 of Skallagrim's Land-Taking. Skallagrim came to land where a large ness ran out into the sea, and above the ness was a narrow isthmus, and there they put out their lading. That ness they called Shipness. Then Skallagrim spied out the land. There was much more land and wide wood, and a broad space between fell and firth, seal hunting in plenty and good fishing. But as they spied out the land southward along the sea, they found before them a large firth, and turning inward along this firth, they stayed not there long, going until they found their companions, Grim the Hålogalander and the rest. A joyful meeting was there. They then told Skallagrim of his father Kveldulf's death, and how Kveldulf had come to land there, and they had buried him. They then led Skallagrim to the place, and it seemed to him thereabouts would be a good spot to build a homestead. He then went away and back to his shipmates, and for that winter each party remained where they had come to land. Then Skallagrim took land between fell and firths, all the moors out to Seal Loch, and the upper land to Borgarun, and southwards to Hafnarfell, and all that land from the watershed to the sea. Next spring he moved his ship southwards to the firth and into the creek close to where Kveldulf came to land, and there he set his homestead and called it Borg, and there Borgarfirth, and so too the countryside further up they named after the firth. To Grim the Hålogalander he gave dwelling place south of Borgarfirth on the shore named Fairhair. A little beyond this a bay of no great size cuts into the land. There they found many ducks, thus they called it Duckile, and the river that fell into the sea there, Duckile River. From this river to the river called Grim's River, the land stretching upwards between them, Grim had. That same spring, as Skallagrim and his cattle driven inwards along the sea, they came to a small ness, where they caught some swans, so they called it Swan-ness. Skallagrim gave land to his shipmates. The land between Long River and Hofsbrook he gave to Ani, who dwelt at Anabrekka. His son was Onunsioni. About this was the controversy of Thorstein and Tongue Odd. Grani dwelt at Granasted on Digranes. To Thorbjorn Crum he gave the land by Gufu River upwards, and to Thord of Begoldi. Crum dwelt at Crum's hills, but Thord at Begoldi. To Thorir Giant and his brothers he gave land upwards from Einkunir and the outer part by Long River. Thorir Giant dwelt at Giantstead. His daughter was Thordestong, who afterwards dwelt at Strangerholt. Thorgil dwelt at Earth Longstead. Skallagrim spied out the land upwards all round the countryside. First he went inwards along the Borgarfirth to its head, then followed the west bank of the river, which he called White River, because he and his companions had never before seen waters that fell out of glaciers, and the color of the river seemed to them wonderful. They went up along White River till a river was before them coming down from the fells to the north. This they called North River, and they followed it up till yet again before them was a river bringing down but little water. This river they crossed and still went up along North River. Then they soon saw where the little river fell out of a cleft, and they called it Cleave River. They then crossed North River and went back to White River and followed that upwards. Soon again a river crossed their way and fell into White River. This they called Cross River. They learned that every river was full of fish. After this they returned to Borg. Chapter 29 of Skallagrim's Industry. Skallagrim was most industrious. He had about him always many men, who he set to seek diligently all such provisions as could be got for man's sustenance, because at first they had but little livestock compared with the needs of their numerous company. But what livestock they had went every winter self-feeding in the woods. Skallagrim was a good shipwright, and westwards of Mirar was no lack of driftwood. He had buildings set up on Swan-ness, and had another house there. This he had made a starting point for sea fishing, seal hunting, and egg gathering. In all these kinds there was plenty of provisions to get, as well as driftwood to bring to him. Whales also often came in there, and whoever so should might could find them and hunt them. All such creatures were then tame on the hunting ground, as they were not used to man. His third house he had on the sea in western Mirar. This was even better a place to look out for driftwood. There too he had land sown and called it acres. Over against it lay islands, among which whales were found. These they called Whale Islands. Skallagrim also sent his men up on the salmon rivers to fish. He set Aud Lone House by Cleve River to see to the salmon fishing there. Aud dwelt under Lone House. Lone House Ness has its name from him. Sigmund was the name of the man whom Skallagrim set by North River. He dwelt at what was then called Sigmundstead, but now Hauga. Sigmundar Ness takes its name from him. He afterwards moved his homestead to Mnodar Ness, that being thought more convenient for salmon fishing. But as Skallagrim's livestock multiplied, the cattle used to get up to the fells in the summer, and he found that the cattle then went on the hearth were by far better and fatter. Also that ship did well through the winters in the fell dales without being driven down. So Skallagrim set up buildings close to the fell and had a house there, and there he had his sheep kept. Of this farm Gris was the overlooker, and after him was called Grissatung. Thus Skallagrim's wealth had many legs to stand on. Some time after Skallagrim's coming out, a ship put into Borga Firth from the main, commanded by a man named Olif Holt. With him were his wife and children and other of his kin, and the aim of his voyage was to get him a home in Iceland. Olif was a man wealthy, high-born, and foreseeing. Skallagrim asked Olif and his company to his house for lodging. Olif accepted this and was with Skallagrim for his first winter in Iceland. But in the following spring, Skallagrim showed him to choice land south of White River upwards from Grim's River to Folkdale River. Olif accepted this and moved thither his household and set there his homestead by Warm Brook, as it is called. He was a man of renown. His sons were Ragi in Hot Spring Dale and Thoraren, Ragi's brother, who took the law speakership next after Roff and Hangson. Thorir dwelt at Warm Brook. He had to his wife Thordis, daughter of Olaf Shai, sister of Thordjella. Chapter 30 of the coming out of Ingvar and of Skallagrim's iron forging. King Harald Fairhair took for his own all the lands that Kveldulf and Skallagrim had left behind in Norway, and all of the property that he could lay his hands on. He also sought diligently after those men who had been in the councils or confidence or in any way helpers of Skallagrim and his folk in the deeds which they wrought before Skallagrim went abroad out of this land to Iceland. And so far stretched the enmity of the king against father and son, that he bore hatred against their kith and kin, or any whom he knew to have been their dear friends. Some suffered punishment from him, many fled away and sought refuge, some within the land, some out of the land altogether. Ingvar, Skallagrim's wife's father, was one of these men aforesaid. This did he take, and then he turned all his wealth that he could into movables, then got him a sea-going ship and crew, and made ready to go to Iceland, for he had heard that Skallagrim had taken up his residence there, and there would be no lack of choice there. So when they were ready and a fair wind blew, he sailed out to sea, and his voyage went quickly. He came to Iceland on the south coast, and held on westwards, past Reykjanes, and sailed into Borgarfjörð, and entering Long River went up and even to the falls. Then they put out the ship's lading. But when Skallagrim heard of Ingvar's coming, he at once went to meet him, and bade him to his house with as many men as he could. Ingvar accepted this offer. The ship was drawn up, and Ingvar went to Borg with many men, and stayed that winter with Skallagrim. In the spring, Skallagrim offered him choice land. He gave Ingvar the farm which he had on Swan-ness, and land inwards to Mud Brook and outwards to Stromfirth. Thereupon Ingvar went out to his farm and took possession, and he was a most able man and wealthy. Skallagrim then built a house on Shipness, and this he kept for a long time after. Skallagrim was a good ironsmith, and in winter wrought much in red iron ore. He had a smithy set up some way out from Borg, close by the sea, at a place now called Roffaness. The woods were close by, but he could not find stone there so hard or smooth as he thought good for hammering iron on. Skallagrim went to the sea and pushed out an 8-oared boat he had and rowed out to the Midfirth Islands. There he dropped an anchor from the bows of the boat, then stepped overboard and dived down to the bottom and brought up a large stone and lifted it into the boat. Then he himself climbed into the boat and rowed to land and carried the stone to the smithy and laid it down before the smithy door, and thenceforth he hammered iron on it. That stone lays there still, and much slag beside it, and the marks of the hammering may be seen on its upper face, and it is in a surf-worn boulder, unlike the other stones that are there. 4 men nowadays could not lift a larger stone. Skallagrim worked hard at smithing, but his housecarls grumbled that he started working too early in the morning, waking them all up. Then Skallagrim composed this poem. Who wins wealth by iron, right early must rise. Of the sea's breezy brother, wind holders need blast. On furnace gold glowing, my stout hammer rings, while heat-feeding bellows a whistling storm sings.